أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings to everyone who has joined us this evening for a community discussion on the COVID-19 vaccine with special guest speaker Dr. Uzma Syed. We also have Maryland State Delegate Jared Solomon from District 18, Montgomery County, to share with us resources on Maryland vaccine clinics. Thank you to our guests for speaking to our community. We appreciate your time and for your continued support of the Muslim community. Our program tonight is brought to you by co-sponsors the Muslim Community Center of Silver Spring, the Muslim Community Center Medical Clinic, Islamic Center of Maryland and Gaithersburg, and Muslim Voices Coalition. So welcome to all of our attendees. My name is Thasnuva Khan. I'm a clinical staff pharmacist at Adventist Healthcare Shady Grove Medical Center and co-founder of Muslim Voices Coalition. I will be moderating tonight's program, which will start with a presentation by Dr. Uzma Syed following a question-answer session. Then we will have a brief overview on Maryland vaccine clinics and resources by Delegate Jared Solomon. He will also answer any questions related to the Maryland vaccine rollout. To our audience, throughout the program, please feel free to type your questions in our chat box. I ask that everyone please remain muted except for our speakers tonight. Let's get started. Introducing Dr. Uzma Syed, a board-certified infectious disease specialist, chair of the COVID-19 Task Force, director of the Antimicrobial Stewardship Center of Excellence at Good Samaritan Hospital Medical Center in West Islip, New York. Dr. Syed is well published in pneumonia-related research and has been leading several COVID-19 clinical research trials. She is a fellow of the Infectious Diseases Society of America, as well as a member of their Inclusion, Diversity, Access, and Equity Task Force. Dr. Syed has been featured as an expert in infectious diseases on several media outlets, including BBC, CBS, ABC, NPR, Fox 5, Pix 11, News 12, FiOS, Newsday, and many more. She was featured on TEDx for her talk on COVID-19, the ripple effect from neighborhoods to beyond. In addition, Dr. Syed is the co-editor of the book Coronavirus Disease, From Origin to Outbreak, forthcoming this year in 2021 by Elsevier. Dr. Syed cares passionately about education. She is the founder and CEO of a 501c3 nonprofit organization, Alliance Inc., which provides career mentorship for high school students. She serves on 3 school committees: safety, business advisory, and diversity. She's a community and youth leader with a focus on teen initiatives as a member of the Interfaith Council of Syosset Woodbury, Jericho. Dr. Syed co-founded the Eid Holiday Coalition Long Island and founded the National Eid Coalition, helping over 24 school districts obtain Eid holidays. She serves on the Nassau County Police Commissioners Community Council, was recognized by the legislature as a female trailblazer, and campaigned for a Syosset School Board trustee position. Her humanitarian work has spanned refugee resettlement to annual school supply and holiday toy drives to serving at soup kitchens. Dr. Syed has volunteered with UNICEF for children's rights, the Global Youth Assembly, and the United Nations to help promote mobile health to underserved countries. Now, without further ado, we are very privileged to have her as our distinguished guest. She is joining us tonight from Jericho, New York, Dr. Uzma Syed.
So the global scale of the pandemic is quite intense. A year into this, it's really, significant burden of mortality, disability and despair throughout the whole world. We've got significant milestones that we keep reaching both globally and locally. We're at over 25 million cases in our country. We've reached over 400,000 deaths. And we can see here that a year ago, we were really just restricted to some activity in Asia, and now you can see that the entire world is really being consumed by COVID-19, and it's really grim numbers. And unfortunately, the United States, we account for about 4% of the population of the world, and we are leading in not a good way with 25% of the cases in the world and 20% of the mortality. So these are, really astounding numbers that we have. If you look at the data from the CDC, again, same thing, we've reached our milestones again of over 400,000 deaths, over 25 million cases, and these cases are just going to continue to climb. Just looking at the country as a whole, we've got COVID-19 is essentially prevalent throughout the whole nation. We've got pockets, in the Northeast, New York, we were the hardest hit initially in the spring, and now we can see that it's widespread throughout the country. We know that states like California, Arizona are really struggling as well with really significant amount of disease, and you can see that on this map. Looking at your area specifically, I pulled this from your state's website and the number of cases that you have right now, and what's happening in your community. About 6.8% positivity recently, and we are seeing in the past week decline in the number of cases, which is reassuring. But you have to remember always that the hospitalizations and the deaths always lag behind. So even though the cases are going down slowly, we have still been seeing significant amount of deaths that are still lagging behind that. So it's been reported that January is really going to be a really terrible month with record number of deaths throughout our nation. Now, I just want to lay the foundation a little bit about this talk on COVID-19 and vaccinations, because very frequently, the question that I get is, how rushed these vaccines have been. So we'll start off by talking about, the outbreak in China, which was first reported on December 31st, publicly, 2019. And just to make you aware that by the second week of January, specifically on January 10th, the first genome of this novel coronavirus was sequenced and made publicly available. And then that sequence was then deposited in the GenBank database and uploaded to the Global Initiative on Sharing All Influenza Data. So very quickly, scientists had already identified the genome, sequenced it, and made it publicly available. So soon after that, the Vaccine Research Center worked quickly. Now I'm going to talk specifically about Mrna, but this also relates to Pfizer. Worked quickly with Mrna to use this information to customize their prototype for the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. By February, we had a vaccine candidate that had already been designed and manufactured. And by March 2020, the vaccine had then entered into the first phase of the clinical trials. And the same can apply for Pfizer. Fast forward to December 18, 2020, that was when Mrna had shown, after passing through all the phases of the clinical trials, that it had 94% efficacy. And Pfizer, as you know, the week prior had submitted their data showing about 95% efficacy. And the FDA had granted emergency use authorization for both of these vaccine candidates. But just to lay the foundation and give you the groundwork, show you the groundwork that was done on this, the speed at which the virus was actually sequenced and made available is really clearly shown by, in a matter of days, between December 31st to January 10th. And then after that, scientists just went to work, working around the clock to really have this scientific breakthrough and be at the place where we are today. Now, I just wanted to walk quickly through, all of the vaccine trials and to give you a little bit foundation. And I do want to put a disclaimer here that some of the vaccine hesitancy, actually a good amount of it, really can be seen with just the initial, naming of, all of this work that's been done. For example, Operation Warp Speed. I don't think that this name was really conducive to people really having vaccine acceptance. So just because it's termed warp speed doesn't necessarily imply that there was any compromise to the safety or efficacy of these vaccines. So if we just put that aside and look clearly at the actual timeline of vaccine development, the typical process and what we're looking at the accelerated process, it gives you an idea that, where we were able to save time was with the sequencing of the virus. Where we were able to save time was with realizing that our traditional clinical trials and scientific methods, we had a lot of nuances in there where we, traditionally were not using our time effectively because there was never really an urgency for that. We were, calling a patient on the first time to talk to them about this trial. Then we were calling them back to have them consent to the trial. Then we were calling them back another time to have blood drawn for them, then possibly another time for a swab, and then, enrollment. So there were a lot of steps that, were really not conducive to the time frame that we have, and those steps were essentially consolidated, and then we were able to enroll large number of volunteers and participants in these trials over a more accelerated time frame, and which is how we had stage 3 clinical trials with about 30,000 people for Mrna, close to 44,000 for Pfizer. And and you look at this time frame, and this is really where we have where we're saving time. Not to mention that this initiative, this global initiative, really involved people. We've never had this kind of urgency because of the scale of the pandemic that we're in, nor have we had people around the globe really contribute to science advancement and to vaccine development with this amount of global initiative, whether it be on the science front or the economic front, where there was significant investment from everyone on a global scale to really get to this point. Because traditionally we would have a candidate that would pass through the phases of the trials, and then investors would look at that candidate and say, okay, now we want to invest, and then the manufacturing would start, and then you're looking at several months down the road, because the investment was made simultaneously as these trials were going on. And investors, in fact, did take a huge risk because nobody knew which vaccine candidate was actually going to successfully meet all of the safety and efficacy protocols and meet the approval. They were taking that risk and they were gambling, but it's because of that gamble that we are able to have these vaccine candidates be approved and be distributed that we've been seeing in the last month. Again, to give you an overview of these trials, these trials are really looked at by independent boards as well. So once the vaccine candidates go through all the phases of the clinical trials, first they're studied in animals, and then they're studied in humans, and they go through the stages of the trials. We have independent bodies that look at the data to make sure that it is in fact safe and efficacious before the data is presented to the FDA. So we have the Data Safety Monitoring Board, we have the Vaccines and Related Biologics Product Advisory Committee that looks at this data, and this is just to give you an idea of how it goes through those channels and then is presented to the FDA. And the goals of all of this is really to ensure safety and efficacy of vaccines, to reduce the morbidity and mortality of COVID-19, to support rapid distribution based on guidance, and to assist with return to pre-pandemic quality of life. And again, this just gives you an overview of how there's so many moving parts that we've been seeing, in real life play out in all of this, how there's so much effort that's required, on a multitude of layers here. You have the FDA working with manufacturers, working with the CDC, working with distributors. You have FedEx, especially with our vaccines that we have right now that are readily available, not necessarily readily available, but have been approved by the FDA. These vaccines, as you're aware, have certain requirements for ultra cold, temperatures, cold chain supply. So we need, all of this collaboration with our distributors to really have this kind of vaccine plan that, we've never dealt with this kind of vaccine campaign on this scale before roll out. And again, this just shows you how you have so many different components and so many moving parts in this scenario. So just to go through quickly the different types of vaccines that are in clinical trials, there are a multitude of vaccine candidates that are being studied in different phases of clinical trials. Some of them have entered into phase 3 of trials, and others are still in the early phases. The two vaccine candidates that we're going to talk about primarily are the Pfizer and Mrna Rna Vaccines, which have been approved under emergency use authorization by the FDA. And, these are just some other ones just for you to have some familiarity with them. We have heard about Astrazeneca. It has Oxford Astrazeneca Vaccine has received approval in the United Kingdom. And, that data has not yet been submitted to the FDA. And then we're hearing a little bit about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine along with Janssen that, is nearing completion, that we're expecting to see some data from that as well. And then if you look internationally, we have other vaccine candidates in other countries, the Sinovac, which is in phase 3, The Sputnik vaccine is in phase 3 as well, Sinopharm, and then you've got the Covaxin vaccine. Some of these are most of these are 2-series vaccines. Some are 1-series. So, we'll talk about that in a little bit more depth. But for all intents and purposes, for us at this point, we have 2 vaccines now that have been granted emergency use authorization by the FDA. This is just to give you a little background on these clinical trials and how vaccine candidates are really vetted and have really gone through these rigorous trials to ensure safety and efficacy at every stage. Phase 1 really looks at a small group of people and looks at, is this vaccine safe and are there any serious side effects that we see immediately? Phase 2 is a little bit larger subgroup of patients that we really are trying to answer the questions: what's the most common short-term side effect that we can see? How's the body's immune response? Those kind of things. Is this protective? And then phase 3 is when you really have a large group of people where you're now widening, casting a wide net to catch, very diverse population by age, by, gender, by ethnicity, by medical conditions, to prove that, this vaccine, in fact, candidate that you have is in fact safe and efficacious. And then the thing to realize is that once the phase 3 trials are done and presented and the FDA approval has been given, phase 4 is still going on. These candidates, trial participants, are followed for about 2 years after the initiation. And so everything is still followed for some time, and everything is documented as far as, all these days out from vaccination, if there are any adverse events or anything else that they need to keep track of. So switching gears quickly to mRNA vaccines, I wanted to just discuss briefly on what mRNA vaccines are, how do they work. Essentially, messenger RNA is a molecule that instructs your body to make a protein. And what it does is, as it enters through the muscle cell, it essentially is, in that area, and it works on teaching your body to make a specific protein. And in our case, we're looking at the spike protein for coronavirus, which everybody's familiar with, the coronavirus, the shape of the coronavirus and how it looks like a crown, which is why it has that name. And these little spike proteins, these are the things that really attach to our cells and the ACE2 receptors. And this is how the virus can gain entry. So what we're trying to do is teach our body to make that protein and then teach our body to make the antibody that's going to block that protein. So there is really no live virus in this vaccine, and there is no dead virus in this vaccine. In fact, it's just a very smart way of teaching your body to make that protein so that your own body then recognizes that as something that is foreign. So if you do come in contact with SARS-CoV-2, which is a virus that causes COVID-19, that your body recognizes it as foreign and prevents that disease from happening and occurring. So talking a little bit about these trials, I wanted to just discuss with you the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, which is approved for ages 16 and older, and the Mrna vaccine is approved for ages 18 and older. That trial, the Pfizer trial, had about greater than 43,000 participants, revealed 95% efficacy at primary endpoint. No serious side effects were really reported in these. And this is a 2-series vaccine that's given 21 days apart. And I mentioned before the ultra cold storage. If you look at the demographic breakdown in these trials, we had 26% of the participants were Latinx, 10% were Black Americans, 5% were Asians, and 1% Native American. And the most common side effect, again, it's important to note that these are more common after the second dose, can happen after the first dose, but were more frequently seen after the second dose. And this is the breakdown of these side effects: injection site reaction being the most common, fatigue, headache, muscle aches, chills, joint aches, and fevers. And we had very similar data on the other side with Mrna. Again, the demographics were also very similar, and the side effect profile was also very similar. The differences being that the Mrna vaccine is 28 days apart, as opposed to the Pfizer is 21 days. Oops. Okay. Again, this is just showing you the demographics of the race and ethnicity in both of these trials, this one being Pfizer, this one is Mrna. Age and gender breakdown for the Mrna study, we see here the breakdown in the demographics in the ages here. Good population was in this age group, and then you had between 45 to 64 and then 65 or above. You can see the distribution between males and females was pretty similar. And in the Pfizer study, the demographics is broken down right over here, where we have about 25,000 people between 18 to 55, and then about close to 18,000 were over the age of 56. Quickly, I'll just talk about Oxford AstraZeneca and the Janssen vaccines. Again, these are not yet approved in the US, but you may hear about this in the coming future. So Oxford AstraZeneca both of these are different mechanisms and of vaccinations, where the other two vaccines are messenger RNA. These are viral vector vaccines. So the Oxford trial had approximately 24,000 participants, and it showed about 70% efficacy in one arm and about 90% in another arm, which you had a difference in the dosing in the two series vaccines. No serious adverse events were reported in this vaccine candidate as well. And the one interesting thing with this is that their trial was set up in a way where they were swabbing people more frequently, and they did prove that there was decrease in asymptomatic transmission in this particular trial because of their data was there. Now, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine candidate, again, it's in phase 3, so we're hoping to have some data on this. The advantages of this is that it's a single dose vaccine, and it can be stored at standard refrigerated temperatures. So both of these vaccines are going to be easier for allocation and distribution globally, and especially thinking about rural areas, even in our country, where people may not have access to large healthcare facilities that have these ultra cold freezers available to have the mRNA vaccines. So really quickly, I'll go through some myths and some facts about messenger RNA vaccines. This might answer a lot of the questions that you might have. So messenger RNA, a myth is that it's brand new technology that's never ever been studied or used before. So in fact, this is false. mRNA platforms have been studied since the 90s. They've been used in cancer therapies. They've been used in other vaccines such as CMV, other viruses, CMV and Zika. We've had a lot of research with other coronaviruses with these as well. There's a myth that mRNA vaccines have part of coronavirus in it, and I just mentioned before that that's not true. There's a myth that's floating around that it can alter your DNA. This, in fact, is not true either. The messenger RNA does not enter the nucleus of the cell, therefore, it cannot alter your DNA. It's just instructing your body really to just make the protein, as I mentioned before, and then it tells your body to make the antibody for it. There's a myth that you can actually contract COVID-19 from the mRNA vaccine. And again, that's not true as well. As I mentioned before, there's no live or weakened virus in these vaccines. I spoke before about how the timeline for this vaccine development, there's, this myth floating around, or this concern that, these vaccines were really rushed and there's no way that they could be safe. And I shared with you before the timeline and how there's been so much scientific breakthrough because of all of the work that had been done previously on a messenger RNA technology since the 90s. And that's really all this foundation work that has been laid for years and years, and especially the work that we've done previously with SARS and MERS, previous coronavirus strains, has led us to this point of really being able to have this kind of vaccine development in this time frame. How long will the immunity last from vaccines? Again, that's an unanswered question at this point. We are really doing this in real time, so only time will tell, but we do know that vaccines itself do induce a more robust and long-lasting immunity. That's why we are recommending vaccination for people, even if they've had COVID-19. And again, this myth that the safety of the vaccines was compromised, a point that I really want to highlight is 9 of the vaccine manufacturers had actually signed a contract in December to really hold themselves to the highest level of safety and transparency. And they, in fact, did something that's very unusual. Usually pharmaceutical companies don't share their, vaccine information, their trial, rather, whether it's medication or vaccines, their trial details. They don't share, it's like their secret ingredients, but they've been very transparent. All of the details of the trials have been open to the public, really on websites where you can just go and find all the information. Not only that, they had signed this contract to say that they will hold themselves to the highest level of safety standards. And then once they were ready to submit their data, FDA actually had asked for them to give 2 months of data, not just 1 month. So there was all these things that were put into place. And I mentioned before how they're independent bodies that are constantly, committees that are monitoring the safety and efficacy, and everything is transparent. You can see all the data, as I shared before with you. If you go on their websites, you can see all the data from these trials. Some information that always comes up, a point that comes up about vaccine ingredients. Apologize, this is a little bit blurry, but this is just a breakdown of the ingredients of both Pfizer and Moderna vaccine. Here's another slide that gives a little bit more detail. But basically, the thing that's important to know from this is that, these vaccines essentially are very simple in the sense that they really are comprised of messenger RNA, which we mentioned before is, a molecule that, teaches your body to make protein, and essentially salts, buffers, and sugars. And the only other ingredient that's in there is polyethylene glycol. And polyethylene glycol, in layman's terms, is Miralax. So most people might be familiar with that, but these are really the ingredients. As you can see, there are really no porcine derivatives in these vaccine candidates, and nor are there any adjuvants or preservatives that we see in traditional vaccines. Children and vaccinations, this comes up frequently. We are going to have more data on this. As I mentioned before, Pfizer vaccine is approved for ages 16 and older. But for younger age group, Pfizer already has about 1,000 participants in the ages of 12 to 15, and Moderna is now enrolling children in their trials as well. So we'll have more data on this as we move forward. Now, moving on to variants, which is a hot topic right now that we've been discussing a lot. Just want to touch base very quickly as we wrap this up and get onto questions, that variants, mutations are not unusual for coronaviruses. It's something that we see commonly, but it happens at a much slower rate than other viruses that, traditionally we see. For example, coronavirus mutations are pretty much half the rate of influenza and a quarter of the rate of the mutations that we see in HIV, just to give you an example. And we've all heard a lot about the variants that have been arising that were first discovered in the United Kingdom, South Africa, and Brazil. And this is just to give you an idea of that these mutations, although they are more rare for coronaviruses, these new variants, the thing that's unusual about them is that they've acquired mutations, multiple mutations simultaneously that have really enabled them to be more transmissible. And this was the concern with the vaccines that were just released, if these were going to be effective for these new variants. And we already have answers to that. Both Pfizer and Moderna have studied both of their vaccine candidates and have shown that they are effective. Pfizer has released data on the B117 variant, which was first discovered in the UK, that its vaccine is effective for that. And Moderna has released data showing that its vaccine candidate is also effective against the B117 variant from discovered in the UK, and then the B1351 from South Africa. Now, the other thing that I wanted to mention really quickly is that this technology, these vaccines, can be tweaked to really cover any other new variants that may arise. And that's exactly what these vaccine manufacturers are doing right now, that they can adjust these vaccines in a relatively quick time frame so that we can, give a booster if needed for any variant that may emerge that may in fact end up being, resistant and escape these vaccinations. Just to give you an overview of the number of countries that have had, these variants discovered, this number is just going to keep rising. And the latest one out of California is also seeming to show more transmissibility. In December, it was responsible for about 3.8% of cases, and by January, it was already up to 25%. So bottom line with variants is, we really just have to keep having good practices of, wearing our mask and, really transitioning to better masks, avoiding those situations where these variants can and transmit frequently. And just like, we've been doing all this time, and just like the data has shown us that indoor gatherings and crowded areas without masks, people outside of your household, is high risk. So just keep that in mind, especially, at this time of year when we don't have the luxury of being outdoors in especially our areas of the country where we are right now. And really the importance of vaccinations to really get ahead of this and really prevent this virus from transmitting so that we can prevent further mutations and further variants from arising. And lastly, just want to share with you that, in the spring, it was quite challenging. There was a lot of anxiety, a lot of despair with the amount of deaths that we were seeing. And although we still are in not great shape in our country, after having the vaccines become available, it really was a silver lining. And, our best tool that we have right now in our toolbox against this pandemic. And lastly, these are just links for vaccine side effect reporting. The VSafe is a website and an app that you will register under once you get the vaccine, and it checks in with you to make sure you're feeling well and you can report any side effects. And the VAERS website is, again, another place where you can report side effects that you might have. And that's it.
All right. Thank you so much.
Most
Dr.
welcome.
Syed.
I hope that was helpful, and I'm happy to take questions now after laying some of that foundation.
Okay, sure. Let's go ahead and do that.
Can I give a couple of questions I've been asked frequently in the questions? One of the questions that come up frequently is about safety of the vaccine for pregnancy and pregnant women, in general, and also for the second dose specifically. And the other question that's come up a lot is the safety of vaccine for minors.
So by minors, I mean
under 18.
Yeah. So right now, we have data only Pfizer's approved really in the ages 16 to 18, and essentially the data that we have, and they do have more data that's going to be released since they do have the younger age groups, 1,000 so participants that are already enrolled in that. So we should have the data, but the most common side effects were the ones that I shared with you, pretty well tolerated across all age groups, and there was really no major adverse events that were reported. As far as pregnancy goes, we don't have data on, hard and solid data on pregnancy because traditionally we don't usually include pregnant women in clinical trials, especially in the beginning. A lot of the data that we have, whether it be for medications or vaccinations in pregnancy, are usually, data that we arise at, inadvertently. And that's something that we've actually seen even in these trials. So what that means is that people inadvertently got pregnant after they've, received the vaccination. And then you arrive at that data that, oh, okay, this was safe. Same thing actually happened in both of these clinical trials where although it was recommended that women of childbearing age not get pregnant, there were a handful of patients trial participants who actually did get pregnant. And so, there's one end of the coin where people are sort of concerned about fertility issues, which also is a myth that, is not proven at all. We can see that women who did get vaccinated did get pregnant. And then on the other end, you do have some data on pregnant women, in these vaccine trials, but just not enough to come out and say that we have solid data. So for pregnant women, really, it's a conversation that they need to have with their physician. It's a very individual discussion that they need to come to. I can tell you that COVID-19 predisposes, pregnant women to more severe illness. In fact, they're at risk of having ICU admission, and they're at risk of having preterm labor. So the risk of COVID-19 is really serious in pregnancy, and a lot of it depends on, how much at risk is that pregnant woman of acquiring, COVID-19, what is their day-to-day situation like? And so it's a risk benefit that they have to have that discussion with their physician. But additionally, majority of societies throughout the country are recommending vaccination for pregnant women, including the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, Maternal Fetal Medicine, American Academy of Pediatrics. Everybody's come out with statements, in support of that. Nobody can give you hard, facts that, we know 100% because, as I mentioned before, this was not studied previously. It is going to be studied in more depth, but right now it's a very individual decision that a person has to take.
So you said it's 16 to 18. What about under 16? Would you recommend people to get it if their kids are under 16?
So under 16 is not yet approved.
Right.
Only 16 and older is approved, and only for Pfizer. And the 12 to 15-year-old age group, those are the 1,000 participants are enrolled in Pfizer, and we should have some of that data in about 2 months or so. And then in Moderna, currently still enrolling, participants in that trial. But for the pediatric population, I don't don't foresee that they're going to be, that we're going to have data or that it's going to have FDA approval, that it's going to get to that stage, anytime soon. Right now, I think we're going to be dealing, and to best protect the pediatric population is really to have majority of the adult population around them immunized. And that's how we can protect them until, vaccine becomes proven to be safe and effective for them and readily available.
Right. And we have a lot of questions about comorbidities, diabetes, and other types of illnesses, and what are contraindications. So, do you just summarize any known contraindications, and most of those diseases that I know of are fine to get the vaccine with?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So really the only contraindication to the COVID-19 vaccines, and I'm speaking specifically just about the mRNA ones that are approved right now in our country, the only contraindication is if you have severe anaphylaxis, like severe allergic reaction classified as anaphylaxis with throat swelling, tongue swelling, difficulty breathing, to any component of the vaccine. So those would be all of the ingredients that I shared with you before. And the one component that would be of concern is polyethylene glycol, or polysorbate. And as I mentioned before, that's Miralax. So for the most part, I think people know if they've had that and tolerated it. If not, obviously that's something that can be looked into, but those are really the only people that should be excluded from vaccinations. Allergies to any other foods or any other medications does not preclude you from vaccination. Underlying medical conditions does not preclude you from vaccinations. In fact, diabetes, hypertension, we know that these conditions really put you at risk of severe COVID. And so it is, really recommended that people with underlying medical conditions that predispose them to severe COVID do get vaccinated.
So I was going to mention that one of the things that I think you said a couple of times that I want to reiterate is that if you have concerns about your condition, medical conditions, you should definitely consult with your physician, and on just so you're comfortable with it. And the other thing is that when you go to get your vaccine, you receive an information sheet that has a full list of the ingredients on it before you get your vaccine. So you should always look at that carefully, so you make sure that there's nothing in there that you're particularly allergic to. Let's see, and there was a fairly
I have a question that actually I wanted to mention. Dr. Syed, what do you say to those who are in the wait and see position, and they are waiting for example, the Astrazeneca vaccine to come out? Can you actually explain the differences and how the primary endpoints were defined between the Pfizer, Mrna, and Astrazeneca vaccines? Are the clinical efficacy standards comparable such that we're comparing apples to apples? Can you, what do you have to say about those who are wanting to?
So first and foremost, we don't have approval yet for Astrazeneca vaccine here. And, the reason most likely that that's happening is because of discrepancy that their trial had between the two different doses. One arm showed 70% efficacy, whereas another arm showed 90%, which was, not the way that their study was designed at first. It was sort of inadvertent way that they came to that because they had two different doses. So I think the FDA, this is something that's going to be challenging for them to really, come to that. But once that data is submitted, it has not yet been, something that the FDA is looking at, and it's not yet approved. So it's not really on the table. So the only two vaccines that we have right now are these messenger RNA vaccines. Now, another thing that I do want to mention is that traditionally vaccines, we were expecting a efficacy range of 70% was very good for us. That's what we were hoping for. These mRNA vaccines have given us about 95%, which we were not anticipating at all, and that's really like a home run. So that is a really good sign. In addition, we know that these vaccines can be tweaked very easily and very quickly for these variants. Should any one variant eventually escape the vaccine, we know that there's a fix for it. So that's another positive thing. The Astrazeneca vaccine, as I mentioned before, it's a viral vector vaccine. So it's a chimpanzee adenovirus that's been altered that, then teaches your body to make, the antibody against, the protein and things like that. So it's a different mechanism. There's advantages, as I said before, with those other vaccines in that the storage is not as difficult. They're more standard refrigerated temperature storages, so it may be easier for distribution. But ultimately, the more vaccines that pass through all of these safety and efficacy profiles and are approved, the better it is for all of us, because we are, it's a race of us against the pandemic. We need as many vaccines as we can have so that we can really vaccinate the majority of the population of this country and of the world to really reach that herd immunity. We have 330 million people in the country. We are seeing how the vaccination rollout is, going much slower than what we anticipated and what we need. And so, hopefully more vaccine candidates, like the Johnson & Johnson and, possibly AstraZeneca become, the data gets released and we have, the endpoint is reached where they become available. But I would say if you're offered a vaccine when you're, to answer your question about waiting, if you're offered a vaccine, I would say take, the vaccine that's offered to you. Right now, we have two excellent candidates that are showing really high, safety and efficacy profiles and really well tolerated. The most common side effects were those ones that I mentioned before: fever, chills, arm ache or body ache, but they're all self-limiting. They're 48 hours and then they dissipate. And you can take something over the counter to help yourself feel better after vaccination should you develop any of those symptoms. I would say the scale of the pandemic and the amount of virus that is transmitting, around our country and around the world, that, if you have the opportunity, if you are eligible, and if you're offered the vaccine, I would not wait, I would take that.
Okay. And if you get both doses of the vaccine, can you still transmit the virus?
So that's something that we don't have data on right now. The way that the Pfizer and Moderna trials were set up, they did not test people at multiple intervals to see if they in fact, are having asymptomatic transmission, or have they halted that. And the reason for that, not every trial is set up the same. Trials are all set up very differently, but also because it's not very comfortable to have these nasopharyngeal swabs done. And, you want to make sure that you enroll people, and sometimes people may not be willing to get swabbed every day and they would not participate in the trial then. So we were not able to prove that. There's a very good chance that it does, really decrease the asymptomatic transmission as well. We just can't say 100% because we don't have that data. We will know as we start vaccinating more and more people. As I mentioned before, the AstraZeneca trial was set up differently where they were doing that. And so they did prove that. So in theory, these should be doing that as well. But right now, until we can reach that herd immunity, even if you're vaccinated, it is recommended that you still wear the mask and, still practice social distancing to protect all of those people around you that are not yet vaccinated, because we know that the vaccine prevents disease. But if there is a chance that you might be, carrying the virus, but just not getting the disease, you might infect somebody that, is not yet vaccinated, who might have bad outcomes.
Okay.
Let's see, we had questions about allergies to chicken and gluten or shellfish. But again, those are, I
Nothing
don't think.
to worry about. Yeah, not a contraindication, no.
Right. I think we've hit a lot of the questions.
I think you did a wonderful job. Kind of as you're explaining, it actually covers a lot of the questions that were that have been asked.
Did we?
I will mention quickly, because there's a lot of questions on allergies. People hear about the severe allergies from these vaccines. Just to let people know that allergic reaction to any vaccine can happen. It can happen whether it's from these COVID-19 vaccines or any traditional vaccine that's been around for decades. This is why when I vaccinate people, my patients, I always watch them. Traditionally, you always have to watch your patients for a minimum of 15 minutes afterwards, because you can have that severe allergic reaction, even to something that you might have had before. And the important thing to know is that this is treatable. So there have been reports of these anaphylaxis, type reactions, severe allergic reactions to these vaccines. The incidence of these still are very, very, very rare. So for Pfizer, they had reported in December early on that their incidence was about 11 per million cases. That number has actually even gone down now, because as they're vaccinating more and more people, it's about 5 per million cases. So very, very rare. And Moderna is, I think, less than 3, I think 2.8 or something like that per million cases. So these can happen. Allergic reactions can happen to anyone with any vaccinations. Obviously, if you have a history of, allergy to any of the vaccine component, then it's more concerning. But it's very, very rare. And it's, the important thing to remember is that all of these are treatable. So it happens in a very short, time frame right after vaccination. And that's why, you're getting vaccinated in an area where they're prepared and they're watching you and they're able to treat you right away. Nobody has died from COVID-19 vaccine. People are dying from COVID-19. So, we're losing about 2,000 to 4,000 people a day in our country. I mean, these numbers are astronomical. We never thought we would be at this place right now where we're setting records. Just, a week ago, over 4,000, almost 45 people died in one single day. It's really astounding to think about the number of people that are succumbing to this. And a year into this, the other thing I want to emphasize is that we still do not have a cure for this virus. We have come a long way. We have many treatments that can help shorten the duration of illness and get people better, but we don't have that magic bullet still. So this vaccine is really the strongest tool that we have in our toolbox right now to really get past this pandemic.
Okay, and then I'll just give one last question and then we'll go to Delegate Solomon. Is there a hope that if the COVID-19 vaccine distribution is improved under the Biden administration, that we may be able to use good public health messaging to encourage those who are vaccine hesitant to later receive other vaccines like flu or measles, for example? And is Moderna really better suited to protect against the new mutations in the virus, as the study they used to come to this thinking what was a Moderna study? Is it best to take this with a grain of salt, seeing as though they may have an interest to claim this? So it's a little bit packed, but of course, about the rollout with the Biden administration.
Can I toss out one question that maybe Dr. can get, or maybe the delegate can get this one? It says, can you speak about access for the vaccine to those without health insurance or who are undocumented? So I don't know if that's better for.
Yeah, I think we can ask Delegate Solomon for that.
Okay, great.
All right.
Let me remember all of those things that you just asked. Okay, so vaccine hesitancy is real. We've definitely seen that. We've seen how much disparity there's been, with this pandemic, and we've seen the inequities throughout healthcare, throughout education, at every aspect. Throughout this pandemic, it's really, highlighted how many things are broken in our system and in our country, and how much work needs to be done. Certainly, I think, the more that we can educate people, the more, we can build confidence, vaccine confidence. And I agree, not just with COVID-19 vaccines. Obviously, it's more, it's really more of an effort right now because this is something new that, people are, not aware of. And so it's more of an effort right now also because of the global scale of the pandemic. But I think the same kind of education and foundation and groundwork can be applied to other vaccination campaigns as well. And as you mentioned, measles, it's really important to know that it's a disease that we had eradicated. And unfortunately, because of, the anti-vax movement, we really have had a lot more cases of measles, and it's a very communicable disease, and people think that it's benign, but it's not. There are many children, many adults that succumb to that as well. So I hope that, we can apply the same principles to other, health policies, and to really, this is the time to really build that foundation and build that infrastructure that we need going forward, so that, we learn from our mistakes and, we don't come back to this place again.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Syed. This was very informative, and our community is very appreciative of all the information that you have given. We are recording this program. It will be available on our website and as well as on YouTube, so that if anyone who missed the information can definitely go ahead and look back. So now I'd like to actually welcome Delegate Jared Solomon. He's the Maryland State Delegate for District 18. He has been a member of the House of Delegates since January 2019, member of the Appropriations Committee, Education and Economic Development Subcommittee, the Oversight Committee on Personnel. He's a member of Maryland Legislative Transit Caucus, an associate member of the Maryland Legislative Latino Caucus, and the Women's Legislators of Maryland. He's a former policy advisor to Pennsylvania Senator Bob Casey and previously worked as an educator teaching social studies at Northwest High School.
Thank you, Tesnuva, and it's a real honor to follow Dr. Syed. And I just want to say thank you for organizing this. I think having these intimate conversations about not only the efficacy of the vaccine, but the nuts and bolts of the rollout and the health ramifications, I just think are so critical. So thank you for organizing, and thank you for everybody who's on tonight. So I'll be brief because I know I'm sure there's a lot of questions, but I know Tesnuva had asked me to sort of go through some of the process of the vaccine rollout, which I think if you've been following the news, has hit some hiccups. And I think, first and foremost, it's important to just sort of lay out part of the reason that we're having the difficulties that we're having in the state is simply because, like many communities around the country, we just don't have enough vaccine. And so, it's really hard to vaccinate, 1.5 million people, which is give or take where we are right now in sort of the open eligible stages in Maryland, when you're only receiving about 72,000 vaccines per week. Give or take about 10,000 a day. So, originally Maryland received about 650,000 doses. And again, it's important to remember, as Dr. Syed was saying, you need two doses. So, as these are being rolled out, there's also a logistic issue of making sure that you not only have enough for the first dose, but you have enough to make sure that people who receive that first dose are able to get that second dose either in 3 weeks with the Pfizer vaccine or in 4 weeks with the Mrna. So Maryland received, give or take, about 650,000 dosages to begin with as sort of that first initial rollout back in December. And that was divided, give or take, about 30% went to county departments of health, about 50% went to Maryland hospital systems, and then the remainder went to a federal partnership with CVS and Walgreens that was set up to do the vaccinations in nursing homes. And so, each sort of segment of the vaccine rollout has involved slightly different elements. And so, the county department of health right now is vaccinating. So there's a tier system, and I didn't bring slides with me, but I know Tesnuva has some of the links, and I can email information that she can also email out. So the tiers that the state use and the county use are based off of the CDC's sort of vaccination work group that put together best practices and reviewed. They may be slightly different in each community, but for the most part, Tier 1A was sort of your frontline healthcare workers, frontline first responders. Tier 1B has been people ages 75 and above, teachers, a set of other frontline workers who didn't qualify in that first tier, and then Tier 1C is 65 and above, and sort of another group of frontline workers or essential workers who weren't earlier. And so, the original batch of vaccines that we received for a county have really been going out to people in that 1A group, the sort of frontline workers, the frontline first responders, the healthcare workers within the county, and the health systems that received, a significant batch of dosages, again, were to, vaccinate frontline healthcare workers within those healthcare systems. And then, again, the federal partnership was supposed to be doing the vaccinations at nursing homes. And so, there's sort of, again, that bifurcated process. So some of the confusion, particularly this past week, has been that the state of Maryland has moved, at this point, to opening up eligibility to people all the way into Tier 1C. So that essentially means anybody who's 65 and above, or a much expanded group of frontline workers or essential workers is now theoretically eligible to get the vaccine. But Montgomery County and the County Department of Health is still only within Tier 1B. And frankly, they're still working on trying to get Tier 1A out. And so, there's been some confusion that people don't understand why, the County Department of Health is not able to vaccinate them, even though they qualify for the state. And so, that leads me to sort of, giving a little bit more detail on where you can sign up. And again, part of the confusion has been that, the state of Maryland chose to do, again, this sort of bifurcated process. And in some respects, I think when we get more vaccinations, that'll be good, that there will be multiple avenues for you to be able to go and sign up for the vaccine. But right now, when we have a shortage, the multiple avenues are just sort of providing more frustration, creating more frustration for people because there's more links and more websites that you need to go to sort of sign up to get on a waiting list. So you can pre-register with the county, with Montgomery County, and when Montgomery County gets to the group that you are eligible for, they will send you essentially a scheduling link. So the pre-registration just puts you on the list. It signs you up for updates. But again, the county is only receiving, has only really received about 35,000 doses of vaccines. And I know, again, some people, take that 35,000 number and they compare it to the 650,000 overall. And, we've gotten a lot of emails of people, not understanding why it seems like proportionally we're getting so few. That 35,000 is just, again, among the county departments of health across the state. So actually Montgomery County makes up, give or take, about 15 or 16% of the statewide population. We've actually gotten a comparatively similar amount of vaccine dosages. And actually last week, the county received about 20% of the overall doses that the state received. So we're doing better. And the county department of health is getting them out almost immediately. I think their vaccination rate is something like 98%. The problem is the county's just not getting a lot because the state is not getting a lot. And the county doesn't necessarily know in advance how many they're getting. The Biden administration just recently said they are going to, sort of overhaul the process that the Trump administration had put in place. They're going to try to increase the amount of vaccines that states are getting. They're also going to start giving states essentially a 3-week rolling average of what they expect, because the state can't plan to the counties until the state knows what they're getting from the federal government. So path one is you can go to the county website, you can pre-register, and the county has set up clinics that, again, you will get a scheduling link for. The other option, and again, this is with a different, a wider array of eligibility, is to go through the state of Maryland's website, and that is covidvaxmaryland.org. And so the state has set up several different places. So the state has just recently unveiled a partnership with Giant pharmacies. There's 4 or 5 locations within Montgomery County, including one in Kentlands, in Georgetown Square, in Burtonsville, the one in Silver Spring on East West Highway, and the one on Old Georgetown Road in Bethesda are all locations that are doing that. The state is also in the process of setting up sort of these mass vaccination clinics at large areas. So places like M&T Bank Stadium up in Baltimore, FedEx Field in Prince George's County, and they're in the process of sort of unrolling and unveiling those. The governor just announced that earlier this week, but the logistics haven't been set up yet. The state also, part of the frustration was that many of the healthcare systems that received, again, 50% of that original batch of vaccines that the state had in December, many of the hospital systems were surprised to see that the uptake among healthcare staff was not as great as they expected. I think the issues that were raised on this call, frankly, I think are issues that many healthcare staff had as well. And so, some hospital systems, frankly, only had 50 or 60% of their staff actually be willing to take the vaccine. And that meant that a lot of healthcare systems were sitting on a pretty sizable reserve of vaccines. And so just this week, the state Department of Health put pressure on the hospital systems to essentially say, you've got to get them out. If your staff don't want to take them, that's fine, but you need to get them out to the community. And so, places like Suburban, places like Holy Cross, Johns Hopkins system are now starting to set up vaccine clinics that they're running out of their own hospital for the general public. And so, Holy Cross and Adventist, for example, just this week started vaccinating people ages 75 and above. And so if you go to the state website, you can find the links to individual healthcare systems. Again, the problem here is that at the end of the day, the state does not have enough vaccines. So if you go through tier 1A, tier 1B, and tier 1C, as I mentioned earlier, there's about 1.5 million people in the state who theoretically could qualify for that, who fit that different criteria. The state only received about 650,000 again from the get-go, from that first round, and we're only really getting about 10,000 vaccines per day. So if you had 1.5 million people, who were going to get the vaccine, you would theoretically need 3 million dosages to get them those 2 shots. And even if you only figured, let's say 60 or 70% of the population was willing to get vaccinated originally, you would still need an incredibly large number of vaccines, much more than what we're getting on a daily basis and a weekly basis from the federal government. So, that sort of has created a lot of these problems. And honestly, the difference between where the county is and where the state is has frustrated a lot of people. And, you can open up eligibility, but the problem is, again, if you do not have, if you don't have enough vaccines, it doesn't matter if you're eligible or not, if there isn't a vaccine that's available to be given. And so that's been the problem. We know, particularly over the last week or so, we've received a lot of concerns and frustrated emails from people who want to sign up to get the vaccine and, have spent hours on various websites trying to find open and available appointments. And it's really hard. I mean, frankly, I would have preferred that the governor had not opened eligibility up to other groups yet, as they're still trying to work through, frankly, the hundreds and thousands of Marylanders who are eligible already and were unable to get appointments. But that was the decision. And even, expanding the options to, to Giant and to Safeway and to Walmart, again, are going to create more locations. But the problem is we don't know where those vaccines are going to come from. It's more than likely going to mean fewer vaccines for county departments of health. So the state website is a little confusing. That's something many of us have been working with the Department of Health to try to streamline. There is no sort of one central point where you can actually sign up. The state website links you to a number of different sites. So it does sometimes feel like you're going down a little bit of a rabbit hole in order to find, where that immediate sign up page is. The county website is excellent. Again, the only concern is that the county just is not, is only getting a small number. But that pre-registration site, I would urge you all, if you are soon to be eligible or are already eligible and are really interested in getting it, sign up for the pre-registration, because as soon as you are available for an appointment, the county will send you a notice and will allow you to register and schedule for the actual vaccine. So with that, I'm happy to take questions. I hope that was helpful. And again, we're all trying to work through this as best as we can and make sure that the systems at all levels are really working as much in coordination as possible.
I had two questions that were pending. Thank you for that information. I think it was very helpful. One question that we had was, what about people that are uninsured or undocumented? Can they still get the vaccine?
Yeah, thank you. So as far as I know, none of the vaccines right now that are being distributed require any sort of insurance information or citizenship paperwork, and they are free. So again, it's a matter of just finding an available location and an available spot to be able to get the vaccine.
The other question is, out of if you see vaccine availability out of county, is that something that people can do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at this point, there are certain locations that the state is running that you should be able to register for. I know that there were several news stories around a location in Prince George's County and Cheverly where they wound up canceling. My understanding is that Prince George's County never intended for that to be made available to residents outside their county. And so there was some confusion over that. The state-run sites, that they'll be opening and the partnerships that they're doing with the various pharmacies around the state will be open to anyone. Again, I think there's been some concern expressed that, for folks who have the ability to travel or have the means to be able to do it, that you are essentially, giving them easier access than people who don't. And so we have had conversations with the county, and I know the county is trying to ramp up, a hotline system and partnerships with senior communities so that folks who may not have transportation or ease of access to internet, are still able to sign up for the vaccine and able to get it.
I could tell a little story quickly that maybe would bolster what you're saying. Is that I know someone who had was over 75, but were registered for the vaccine in Montgomery County. They had they just registered for the wait list, and they were called on a Friday afternoon. They live up in Damascus, and there was availability in Tacoma Park, and they said, well, if you can come down here, we have vaccines available and thought out that we can give. And they drove down and got them that day. So I don't know if that happens everywhere, but I know that once a pharmacy opens up the vaccines, they have to use them up. So if they're cancellations, they might have. I think you guys go to the waiting list and invite people.
Yeah, so I think that is that's sort of up to individual locations. I don't know that the county has a formal policy on that yet. I will tell you, I've heard that Holy Cross was working with sort of the community immediately around them, and it's something that I've been exploring to see if we can get other places. And I know there's been a number of stories in the Washington Post about in the District of Columbia, sort of Giant doing that. I read one just this past weekend where literally the pharmacist pulled somebody they found in the supermarket and said, we have the vaccine, it's going to expire in 10 minutes. If you want it, we'll give it to you. I think that's okay in a situation like you said where the vaccine is going to expire, but we should, in this day and age, we should have a good enough scheduling system that that we're prioritizing the communities that really need it first off, before we're just sort of throwing it open to anybody. And I know many of us have been frustrated that that we're not quite there yet. And I think the state Department of Health needs to do a better job of streamlining the process.
Well, following up on that, actually, can you ask how quickly they're, can you tell us how quickly are they analyzing the registrations to place those who need it most, get it quickly? Like in terms of the prioritization, I know that they were doing the K through 12 educators and those who are in daycare providers. But what about those who, again, fall under that tier of getting it first and them contacting them first?
Yeah, so the county, frankly, has been doing a really good job of that. So even if you register and you're eligible, they are trying to sort of sort through individual tiers and prioritize communities or or groups that they know are most at risk, so that it's not. And it was interesting. We saw some data. For example, the data of people who have signed up so far do not match the profile of the county population. So it's something like 60,000 people who have signed up are considered to be white, and only 10,000 or 15,000 are people of color. That is not the makeup of the population of Montgomery County as a whole. And so the county Department of Health is doing a really good job. Frankly, one of the frustrations that I think many of my colleagues and I share with the state is that the state prioritization does not seem to work that way. And so with Giant and with Safeway, there is no prioritization. And I know, so we've set up a Senate, a Maryland General Assembly Oversight Committee to look at the way the state has rolled out the vaccine. And one of the questions, to the pharmacy partnership was exactly what you just posed. And, they are prioritizing it in terms of the tiers, but, there's a vast difference among people age 65 and above of what the need may be. And they are not prioritizing within that group. Anybody who signs up, as long as you meet that eligibility requirement, that's it. And frankly, I think there's some questions about whether that's the most effective way to do it.
And is there any? Oh, sorry.
A question from the chat. Unless you want to go ahead. Do you have a follow-up to Snuva? You want me to go?
Yeah, I wanted to ask if there was any effort from the state, from the county, in actually reaching out to minority communities of color, making sure that they have not only the information, the education about the vaccine, but also access to getting it.
Yeah, so my understanding is the county is already either doing that or in the process of rolling it out. And I'm going to put my contact information in the chat as well, so that folks can follow up directly with me if you have additional questions, or if we can connect you. We've worked really closely, obviously, with our partners in Rockville. I think part of the issue is that right now, because the county is still trying to even get all of the first responders to be vaccinated, that a lot of that additional outreach will roll out when they have actual doses of vaccine. And so, in our conversations, we have a regular check-in with the County Department of Health and county leadership. That part of it is just that the dosages they're receiving are so small that, they're just trying to sort of get the initial wave of people before they start expanding it even further.
So I was going to ask about that too, whether you had clinics set up in disadvantaged or minority communities, but I guess you're working on that. The question from the chat says, if one gets the first vaccine and can't get the booster in the time frame prescribed for whatever reason, do they need to get the first shot again? I don't know if you're qualified to answer that, but you might know the answer.
I would defer to the medical experts on here. I do know that
I don't know the answer to that.
As soon as you get that first vaccine, the first dosage, there is a sort of a QR code that you can scan and immediately schedule yourself for your next appointment.
Yep.
But I don't know if you don't get that.
I can kind of answer.
I will say that if you miss by a couple of days, plus or minus, it's okay.
Yeah, well, I can answer that. I mean, if you are missing your doses based on where you got your first dose, you should be able to contact the location and let them know. And perhaps maybe if you're living in Montgomery County, if you call the health department and let them know that you got your first dose, but you were not able to schedule your second booster, I'm sure that they would be able to find out where a vaccine schedule.
I think they're asking if they missed their time frame for their second dose. what would they have to, would they have to start the cycle again? I
Right, it depends on how long. It depends
depends
on
on how long, right?
Yeah.
After the, yeah,
yeah,
that's what I would say.
right. Okay, well, I guess we have had an amazing presentation from Dr. Syed, who actually did have to leave. So we're very thankful to her for her presentation. And thank you, Delegate Jared Solomon, for giving us so much information about what's going on with the state and the county and about the vaccine clinics. We did, Arib, if you can just go ahead and share the screen really quick with that slide that has the links. And we do have some links. We did drop it into the chat. And we also put in the Maryland COVID-19 website from the state with a lot of links on there. All that.
So again, just to remind people, we're going to be posting this, links to this on the MCC website, on the MC Clinic website, I think on the ICM website. They'll also be available on the MCC YouTube channel, which is MCCMD is the name of the channel. So just go to YouTube, put in MCCMD, you should see our channel, and there's quite a few videos there. This will be one of them. So it's easy to find and easy to send to people. The other thing I want to do quickly is just to thank the people that worked very hard to organize this. Sister Tasnuva, Sister Adila from ICM, Sister Mrna from the MCC, and Dr. Upal from the MCC Clinic. I think we really appreciate all the work you put in. And Brother Reeb, of course, on short notice for putting together the technical part of this. So thank you all.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night. Assalamu alaikum.
Good night.
Yeah.
Waalaikumsalam.
Thank you, everybody.